The attic was my personal graveyard of forgotten things. Old boxes, battered books, pieces of broken furniture. Everything held the spirit of a time I had never known. Today, I finally decided to bring some order to the chaos. The beam of my flashlight revealed corners of furniture and dusty shelves in the dimness. In the far corner, beneath a stack of old blankets, I noticed a dark rectangle. It turned out to be an old photo album. Its leather cover was cracked, its pages yellowed, and they let out a soft crackle with each turn. I sat down on the wooden floor and began flipping through it. The photographs showed a young woman, beautiful, with long chestnut hair and a gentle smile that clearly belonged to a world before me. Beside her stood a boy, around 10 or 12 years old. In several pictures, they stood together, holding hands. The boy was Logan, my stepson, though much younger. Memories I had no connection to exerted a strange, unsettling influence on me. Between the pages, I found a small note. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still legible. The handwriting was uneven, but unmistakably feminine. It was a note from Logan's mother. "Never forget who you are, and remember how much you are loved." I read it several times, feeling as though I was intruding on someone's private world. A note from a mother to her son. Warm, heartfelt words. And I, a chance witness to this intimate connection. When I came down with the album, the house was quiet. I placed it on the coffee table in the living room and didn't return to it for the rest of the day. In the evening, as I passed by, I saw Logan. He was standing, slightly bent over the table, studying the photographs. He flipped through them slowly, almost reverently. His face seemed calm, but his eyes betrayed something more. Memories, sadness, perhaps even longing. I wanted to say something encouraging, but froze, afraid to disturb the moment. Logan suddenly looked at me, nodded with quiet gratitude, and returned to the album. In that moment, I understood. This find was not just a relic of the past for him, but a piece of something he had lost. On Friday, Jake suggested we spend the evening as a family at the bowling alley. It was one of those ideas he called bonding activities, though Logan rarely showed enthusiasm for such occasions. But to my surprise, this time he agreed. Maybe it was because of the album, or maybe it was just a coincidence. I didn't ask. The bowling alley was noisy. Laughter, the crash of balls against pins, sudden applause, all mixed into a chaotic melody. Logan stood a little off to the side while Jake and I warmed up, but then, unexpectedly, he picked up a ball. His confident movement, a light swing, a precise throw, knocked down all the pins on his very first attempt. "Did you see that?" Jake asked excitedly as he returned from the next lane. Logan just shrugged, as if it was nothing. I smiled. This kid was definitely hiding something. When Jake left to grab drinks, Logan and I were left alone. I decided to lighten the mood. "You take bowling way too seriously," I teased him. "Where's your competitive spirit? The thrill?" For the first time in a while, he smiled. Not politely or out of obligation, but with a spark in his eyes. "Maybe you just don't know how to handle losing," he quipped with a smirk. "Oh, please," I laughed. "Let's see about that. If you win, I'll tell you an embarrassing story about myself. If I win, you'll have to spill one." "Deal," he agreed, his eyes glinting with a hint of a challenge. To my surprise, I held my own almost until the end. My throws weren't perfect, but I was close to winning. However, Logan's final turn, a flawless strike, dashed my hopes. "All right, fair's fair," I sighed, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. Once, I walked into the wrong door at a train station. I saw a man at a sink and probably made the most horrified face of my life. He looked pretty shocked too, by the way. Logan burst out laughing, a genuine, hearty laugh that was utterly contagious. In that moment, it felt like the icy wall that had always stood between us began to melt. It was one of those rare moments when he was simply himself, without the guardedness, without the tension. Jake returned, oblivious to our little bet, and we continued playing. But now I looked at Logan differently. Beneath his quiet exterior was someone I still barely knew. The next day, Jake, absorbed in his endless work calls, asked me to take Logan to the farmer's market. I sighed, bracing myself for a chilly outing with a silent teenager. But to my surprise, Logan didn't resist. He simply nodded and headed to the car. The farmer's market was bustling with life. The aroma of freshly baked bread and herbal tea filled the air, while the voices of vendors called out, competing to draw attention to their stalls. We wandered through the rows, browsing vegetables, cheeses, and homemade sauces. I tried to strike up a conversation, but he responded with short, curt phrases. That is, until we ran into one of his classmates at a stall. "Logan?" a girl exclaimed with a mischievous smile. "Didn't expect to see you here, and I think I know who this is." She nodded in my direction. Logan gave her a look of mild irritation, but it seemed he knew there was no escaping a conversation. "This is Emma," he introduced me dryly. "Oh, we know each other through Logan," the girl said with a laugh, cutting me off before I could reply. "Did you know he once fell straight into a pond trying to save someone's backpack?" Logan squinted at her. "Mia, stop." "Oh, I won't stop." She giggled, but caught the slightly embarrassed look on his face. All right, I'm done. Emma, good luck with this quiet hero of yours." And with that, she disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. As we moved away from her stall, I noticed Logan's face was slightly red. "You really saved someone's backpack?" I asked, hoping to ease the moment. "It was a long time ago," he muttered, trying to sound indifferent. "That was kind of you," I remarked. He glanced at me, surprised, as though he hadn't expected such a comment. We continued walking, and I bought a couple of lemonades from a street vendor. We sat down on a bench near a fountain, watching the water cascade down the stones in steady streams. "Do you come here often?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Sometimes. It's quieter here than at home," he replied after a pause. We started talking about food, and to my surprise, Logan mentioned that he was interested in cooking. He spoke about it with unexpected enthusiasm, recounting how he once made a complicated dish that turned out better than he'd anticipated. "If you're interested, you could help me with dinner tonight," I offered. He considered it for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, that might be fun." What had started as just another errand turned into something more meaningful. I realized Logan could open up, though it took time. His silence wasn't coldness. It was simply his way of protecting himself. On Sunday morning, Jake, as usual, was absorbed in his work. To make good use of the day, I suggested that Logan join me for a jog in the park. He reluctantly agreed, surprising me once again with his willingness. I decided not to question it and simply enjoy the moment. The park was still cool, the sun barely risen, filling the air with a crisp freshness. We jogged in silence, the only sounds being our footsteps and the chirping of birds. After a while, Logan stopped at a fork in the paths. "Let's go this way," he suggested, pointing to a less trodden trail. "Are you sure?" I hesitated. "Why not?" "It's always more interesting to go where you haven't been." I followed him. The path was winding, overgrown in places, and led us deeper into the woods. We chatted about random things. The weather, how funny it was when squirrels dropped nuts from trees. Logan even joked that in another life, he could have been a naturalist. But soon I realized we were lost. The path, which had seemed endless, had disappeared entirely. We stood in the middle of the woods, surrounded by tall trees that all looked the same. "So, do you know which way is north?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I thought you knew," he replied, giving me a half-mocking look that made me laugh despite the situation. We debated for a while about which direction to take, though it seemed both of us knew it was pointless. At one point, Logan stopped and looked up. "Look, an owl," he said, pointing to a branch above us. Sure enough, an owl was perched there, staring at us curiously. "Maybe it knows the way," he joked. "Or it's just waiting for us to be its lunch," I countered, and we both laughed. The moment eased the tension. We decided to pick a random direction and hope for the best. Before long, we stumbled into a clearing where an unexpected surprise awaited us, a family having a picnic. They noticed us and, seeing our confusion, invited us to join them. We sat down on their blanket, drank tea, and had a couple of sandwiches. The adults were friendly, and their kids ran around, laughing and inviting us to play with them. To my astonishment, Logan, who usually avoided social interactions, joined in their games with enthusiasm. When it was time to leave, one of the adults pointed us toward the path back to the park exit. I thanked them, and Logan waved goodbye. On the way back, he said, "That was a good day." And I couldn't disagree. Despite our little mishap, for the first time, I felt like Logan and I were becoming a team. Midweek, to my surprise, Logan suggested we spend an evening together at a small restaurant. It was a cozy family-run place known for its homemade pasta dishes. I'd often mentioned how much I loved pasta, but I hadn't expected him to remember, let alone suggest something like this on his own. We arrived in the evening. The restaurant was filled with soft light, the scent of spices and quiet music. Logan ordered carbonara, and I chose lasagna. When the food arrived, I noticed how attentively he observed the presentation, as if carefully evaluating every detail. We ate in silence, but it wasn't the tense silence of the past. This silence was comfortable, almost friendly. Eventually, he spoke. "You know, it was hard for me when Dad said he was getting married," he said suddenly, setting his fork down. I looked up, surprised by his honesty. "I understand," I replied carefully. "It was unexpected for me, too." Logan nodded, as if acknowledging my perspective. I was angry. At him, at you, at everyone. I felt like he was trying to replace Mom, and you were a stranger, he said, his voice calm without blame, but his words tightened something inside me. "I never tried to replace her, Logan," I said earnestly. And honestly, I was scared too. Scared we wouldn't find a way to connect. "But you tried," he said, meeting my eyes. And it showed. I don't know if Dad noticed, but I did. I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. When the waiter brought the check, Logan suddenly removed a silver ring from his finger. I recognized it immediately. It was in all the photos from the album. "Mom gave this to me when I started college," he said quietly, holding it out to me. "She always said things like this bring good luck. I think she'd like it if you wore it." I froze, not knowing what to say. The gesture was deeply moving, bringing tears to my eyes. I accepted the ring, feeling its cool metal against my palm. "Thank you, Logan. This means more to me than you can imagine," I whispered. When we left the restaurant, the night was warm, and the air smelled of an impending storm. We walked to the car in silence, but now it was a silence filled with trust. On Friday evening, Logan suggested we go to the pier. He said he wanted to show me how beautiful it was at sunset. His initiative surprised me, but I agreed. We grabbed takeout coffee from a small cafe along the way and arrived at the pier just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The wooden dock was nearly empty. We sat at the edge, dangling our feet over the water. The gentle lapping of waves and the cries of seagulls created a soothing backdrop. I wasn't sure what to say, but Logan started the conversation himself. "Do you remember the album? The one you found?" he asked suddenly. "Of course," I replied, slightly on edge. I couldn't bring myself to look at it for the longest time. Too many memories, too much pain. He paused, gazing at the water. But when I finally opened it, it was a strange feeling, like Mom was right there with me. I didn't know how to respond. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet sadness in it. "She was an incredible person," he continued. "She always knew how to lift me up when I was falling apart. When I doubted myself, she'd always say the same thing. 'You can do anything, just believe in it.' I felt my heart clench. 'I think she'd be proud of you, Logan,' I said softly. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving a golden path across the water. Logan turned to me suddenly, his gaze so gentle it made it hard to breathe. You try so hard," he said. Sometimes I get angry at you, but it's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's because I see how much you're trying, and it throws me off." His words took me completely off guard. "I don't know how to handle that," he added. Before I could respond, he leaned in and, with a delicate hesitation, kissed me. His lips brushed mine for just a moment, but there was so much emotion in that brief contact that I froze, unsure how to react. We sat there on the pier in silence as night fell. And there, surrounded by darkness and the sound of the waves, we stayed. A few days later, Logan came to me while I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. His face was serious, and I immediately sensed that this was going to be an important conversation. "Emma, I need to talk to you," he said, lowering himself into the chair across from me. I set my cup down, a slight unease settling in. "I'm listening," I replied gently. He hesitated, as if gathering his thoughts. Then, with a deep breath, he said, "I'm leaving." I was taken aback. "Leaving? Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "To another city. I've been offered an internship I've been considering for a while. I have to leave next week," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. I sat in silence, trying to process his words. He watched me intently, as though bracing himself for my reaction. "That's a great opportunity," I finally said. "I'm happy for you. But why now?" He looked away, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Because staying here, it's hard. There's too much here holding me back. It's not just the place. It's the feelings I can't fully understand," he said, turning his gaze back to me. There was a sadness in his eyes. "I need time to figure myself out." His words were both clear and deeply painful. I nodded, knowing I couldn't stand in his way. "I respect your decision, Logan," I said. "And if this is what you need, I'll support you." He lowered his head before quietly adding, "Thank you for everything you've done for me. Even when I was awful. Even when I was angry. I've learned a lot from you." I felt tears welling up, but managed to hold them back. Instead, I reached out and clasped his hand. "You're an incredible person, Logan, and I'm proud of you." He smiled, a little sadly but genuinely. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned forward and hugged me. I felt him tremble, and it broke something inside me. "Good luck," I whispered. We stayed in that embrace until it became clear that there was nothing more to say. He had made his choice, and I knew it was the right one, no matter how difficult it felt. A month had passed since Logan left. The house without him felt too quiet, almost empty. Jake was proud of his son, often speaking about Logan's accomplishments with glowing admiration, but I avoided those conversations. Everything that reminded me of Logan had become a forbidden island. I didn't know how to cope with the wave of emotions that engulfed me. One evening, while tidying up the bookshelf, I accidentally found an envelope. It bore nothing but my name, written in Logan's neat, deliberate handwriting. My heart tightened. I sat down on the couch and carefully opened it. Inside was a letter filled with his words. Honest, warm, and free of embellishments. "Emma, I've never been good at expressing what I feel. You probably thought I was closed off, that I kept you at a distance. And I did, but not because you deserved it. I was scared. Scared that growing close to you would betray the memory of my mom. But you never tried to replace her. You were just yourself, and that taught me so much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the laughter, the conversations, and everything else that helped me become better. I wanted to say this in person, but I didn't have the courage. I'm sorry. Let this letter and the photo remind you of how much you meant to me. Logan." Attached to the letter was a photo from our evening at the pier. I remembered the moment well. We had sat at the edge of the dock, staring at the sunset, and for the first time truly opened up to each other. In the photo, Logan looked relaxed, almost happy. His words moved me to tears, but at the same time they left me with a heavy emptiness. It felt as if, despite their significance, they couldn't fill the void his departure had left behind. I sat with the letter in my hands for a long time before I made a decision. Late that evening, I drove to the bridge over the river, clutching the letter and the photo. The bridge was deserted, its lamps casting reflections in the calm water below. I stood by the railing, staring at the letter. This moment was about more than saying goodbye to Logan. It was about letting go of what had been holding me back in the past. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the letter and photo slip from my fingers into the water. They floated on the surface briefly before being carried downstream, disappearing into the darkness. When I returned home, I felt an odd mix of relief and sadness. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to move forward. I knew Logan was moving forward too, and that thought helped me accept what had happened. What remained in my heart was the best of our moments, and that was enough.